Let's just see what he does.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Already Christianity. Thank you for joining us. For those that have not joined us on a regular basis or may be new, this is a podcast, a conversation that has an apologetics spin to it. People always get confused when you say the word apologetics as if we're apologizing for something, but apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, to give an answer. It comes from 2 Timothy 2:15 in Scripture, 1 Peter 3:15 and 16, and so that's what we need to do. We believe that Christians, followers of Jesus Christ, need to be able to give the why they're a Christian and what does that mean if you are a Christian. And I think that's what's missing. And so we try to tackle subjects that maybe the church as a whole, the Big C church, meaning the body of Christ, doesn't want to tackle. But when God has an opinion about something, his opinion is our opinion. That's what it means for Christ to be our Lord. That means that he gets to decide how we live our lives. We're passionate about this. I've shared my testimony with you guys in the past, multiple times. I went through a series of shitstorms in my life, from being arrested for selling drugs to my brother being shot in the face and murdered in my parents' driveway, and we walked out minutes later, to my son being diagnosed on the spectrum of autism, to being labeled and attacked and all this kind of bullshit that you go through, going through politics when you're being obedient, just serving and trying to fulfill a purpose. So I always tell people that I have every earthly reason to be pissed off at a creator or a God, if you believe in the biblical God, and I'm not. I mean, I'm in love with a first century Jew named Jesus. And once I studied him, I grew up in a certain denomination. I didn't have answers for why I was a Christian. I couldn't tell you why I believed what I believed. I didn't live it out. I sure as hell didn't live a Christian or a denomination or any kind of life like that. I mean, obviously I wouldn't be selling drugs and doing the shit that I was doing. But I am now. I'm absolutely convinced of that book, all 66 chapters, and there's answers. And when I was going through my journey, and I always call it, which is kind of one of the reasons why it's called R-Rated Christianity, my R-rated journey to Christ, I asked a lot of questions, and I asked some tough questions, and I asked questions that normal people don't ask maybe, because it had to make sense in my mind. My faith, or what I thought was my faith, didn't make sense in my mind, and so I wanted it to make sense, because if it was true, it had huge implications to our life, and it has huge implications to society, and it has huge implications to how we interact with each other and how we do this thing called life. And so that was kind of my journey, and it was rough. It wasn't sterile. It wasn't sanitized. Some Christians, don't like us, and they're upset because of the slang words we use. I mean, look, if you're going to count words, I'm going to give you a heads up. Just get off this podcast, I guess. We're not here to count words. I mean, we understand Ephesians 4:29 like anybody else, like I talked about last week. And we're never going to violate Scripture. We're militantly loyal to the Word of God and to Jesus. And that takes courage, but also understanding and studying and properly handling the Word of truth. And so we do our best to do it. Do we do it perfectly? Probably not, I'm sure. But our intention is perfect. Our intentions are perfect. And so this conversation that we started over a year ago now, George, right? It's been solid about May was a year, right?
Yeah.
And so it was the intent to help people understand their faith, because one thing that irritates the living piss out of me is fake ass Christians. I can't stand it. I can't stand inauthentic Christianity, because Jesus was anything but inauthentic. Right. And he hung around a bunch of broken ass people, which gave me hope. And when I realized in my journey, in my studying of that first century Jew, because I wasn't sure he was who he said he was, in my studying of that first century Jew, I came across Luke 15, and I realized that, man, this guy's absolutely insanely obsessed with lost things, because Luke 15 all it talks about is lost things. The lost coin, the lost sheep, the lost son, everything is lost, and he cares about lost things. And I was lost in my life. When you load your brother's body on the gurney after rigor mortis sets in, when you help your pop wash your brother's blood off your driveway, and you pick your mom off the floor because all her mucus and saliva and tears are on your body, and you see your whole family destroyed, and you know your life's never going to be the same. And you know there's going to be a new normal in your life, and you have no idea what that is, and you don't even know what your future is, whether you're going to be dead, in prison, whatever the hell is going to happen to you. I mean, you want some answers, and you want to know whether this faith or religion you grew up in is really true. And where Mike was, I remember asking that question, where was Mike? I've shared this with you, George. Where Mike was at that moment, I remember it specifically. And so you ask questions, and I asked tough questions, from Genesis to old earth, young earth, abortion, you name it, Genesis, is it real, science versus faith, all this other crap that everybody gets tied up in. And there's answers, guys. My journey has been this search. I said last week that we're supposed to be truth scavengers as Christians, is scavenging for that truth. And George has been a big part in my walk. Over 12 years we've been friends. We call him the professor for a reason. The Lord has blessed him with a LeBron James mind, and so we've walked together, and iron sharpens iron, and we've been teaching together for years, and so we were blessed that the Lord trusted us with this platform and people that believed in it, and we hope it benefits people. It's just a conversation. We invite people that are not part of the church family, that are not Christians, to eavesdrop in and chime in. You're welcomed here. Questions, you can have questions. Yeah, we always invite questions and comments, and we do our best to try to keep up with it. It's hard because Tyler is tries to monitor, and we do the best we can, so it's not that type. We try to be as interactive as we can, but also teaching at the same time and having discussions. But we invite your comments, and we'll do our best to keep up with it. Salvo's watching, Tyler's watching, Charlie's trying to peel those skinny jeans off his body, so he's not here with us tonight. Those that don't know, I always bust Charlie's balls about wearing skinny jeans. But so that's it, and so last week, George, and so yeah, I forget, share if you like or whatever, share it to people if they think they'll benefit from this. But last week, George, we tackled a topic that a lot of people couldn't believe we had to tackle, and it was the idea of pedophilia being normalized in our society. I noticed this years ago, and I shared with you last week, and I shared with George years ago when I was still district attorney. I was at this meeting where I was given an update, and I was asked a question, what's your position on, I don't even know how the hell they put it, but I thought they were referencing an Islamic, in Sharia law, where under Sharia law, you can marry a child, but not consummate until 9 years old, because Muhammad consummated with one of his wives, who was a child, but at 9 years old, correct, George?
Aisha.
Aisha, that he has the name. And so I thought he was referencing that, and I said, well, no, I don't support that. And then he goes, no, I'm talking about just the idea of an adult dating or being attracted to a younger child. And I might have used a couple of words that would offend you if I used it that started with F and ended with K, and then put a no behind it. And I was real just distinct about it and very direct about it. But that taught me, nobody freaked out, nobody questioned, nobody pushed back. And I remember thinking to myself, what is this shit happening, man? What's going on? Is this real? And then I did some research. I, looked into it, Googled whatever the hell, and I saw a TED Talk on it. I saw there was actually, even years ago, this was, 4 years ago, 4 years ago? I mean, years ago, this movement was gaining steam, this normalization of people being attracted to young people. There was I guess somebody posted some shit that this guy needs to be just an idiot, Tom Wilson. He was responding to somebody, I guess is this Twitter? I don't have a Twitter account. It isn't harmful if they enjoy it. This is what he's talking to. He's answering to some girl, Nicole. Children can learn to enjoy sex with an older partner if they experience it with consent. I'm really trying to stop myself from using language that people are going to be all offended by, and sensitive asses out there, because conservatives are closed-minded and afraid of change. This is not a conservative or liberal issue. This is just more of a moral compass issue. What's right and wrong? We live in a progressive era now. It's time to ditch pedosexual phobia. So you disagree with something, put a phobia behind it or whatever the shit, and then oh man, better be quiet. I want to be called this whatever phobe. Which is absolutely insane. Grow some balls, do something, man. Stand up for what's right and be able to advocate why you believe it's right. But we were talking about that, so we took the approach. Instead of being angry, because when we posted this, people were angry, like, screw this, I'll hang him up by his nuts, all this other crap. Okay, that's fine. I get that emotion because our children are vulnerable and they're considered soft targets, as we say in the justice system. So we say, okay, well, this is a Christian podcast. So what is a biblical perspective of just sex general? What's the biblical prescription of sex? So what we did was said, okay, here's God's prescription of sex within a marriage, and it's only acceptable within a marriage. We talked about how the Bible talked about it as fire. That fire in a fireplace is great. Fire on a stove is great. Fire in the old days on a lantern is great. Fire on your walls is not good because it can burn your house down. Fire on your skin can kill your ass. So context matters, and if you keep it in its proper perspective, sex is beautiful because God designed it, and you should enjoy it. And if you're married, you should have it often and as much as you can. And it's beautiful. God's not freaking out what you're doing with your husband or your wife. And so that's one thing about it. Christians get all prude about sex and they don't know how to talk about it. And I never preach to young people that sex is a bad thing and it's not a boogeyman type deal. It's a beautiful thing within context, and at the right time you'll be able to experience it. That's the message that we're going to give to our children and what I give to young people when we talk. So we started there, right, George? And then we went from there, of course, and then we dissected biblically why this concept of pedophilia is not biblical. First of all, especially because outside of a marriage, but then we talked about consent and consciousness and being an age of consciousness that you can understand. And just because someone thinks that they consent, as this dumbass says, I mean, people were consenting to Madoff also. If you don't know who Madoff is, Bernie Madoff, I mean, he a huge scam artist, this Ponzi scheme, took millions and millions and millions of dollars of people, but they willingly gave their money to him, but they were under a deception. Sure. I mean, the devil comes to kill, steal, and destroy in John 10:10, and that deception is part of that. So did they consent? Well, yeah, that doesn't absolve them because it was under a false pretense. And same with these children. So we started there, George, and then of course the natural progression is going to be to have a conversation. Okay, where else in our societal issues, because we talk about gender fluidity and what that means in Matthew 19 and Genesis 2 and all this stuff about gender and our feelings versus reality and biology and science and all this stuff. So, Christians are called the anti-science people, which is absolutely insane. There's no Christian should be anti-science.
Some are.
But they're not very wise. Yeah. But then yet people deny science on this issue when you talk about biological differences and things of that nature. So sorry for the long intro. I hope it was helpful to kind of catch people up on a number of things. But that's kind of where we're at, George. And we said that let's just continue this conversation because we're talking about biblical prescription for sex, all sex, whether it's adultery, whether it's fornication, whether it's homosexual, whether it's transgender issues, whether it's pedophilia. I mean, God talks about this. He talks about sex. Here's my prescription. I made it up. I invented it. It's beautiful. You should enjoy it. There's a purpose behind it. And then we kind of go from there, George.
Well, I think you started at the right place, which is at the beginning. We start in Genesis because that's where it all starts. The model is a heterosexual monogamous model, and it's clearly two consenting adults. You have the model in Genesis 1:26 through 31, which talks about maleness and females, right? Mankind is male and female, and God created that structure for procreation and for unity. And so, okay, what does that look like then in terms of a marriage relationship? And this is where Genesis 2 picks up. So we've got mankind created, it's male and female. Now what do we do with this?
Right.
And so Genesis 2:18 through 25, we have God officiating the first marriage. And so you literally have this description of man leaving his father and his mother and cleaving
together.
Right? So it's a deliberate unity with his wife. It actually says his wife. So it's singular, not wives. We know that polygamy was allowed in the ancient Near Eastern world.
Culturally, not more.
Polygamy was allowed in the ancient Near Eastern world, in Mesopotamian and Assyrian civilizations. It was also allowed in Syro-Palestine and among Israelites, but it was never codified in Israelite law. That's important to recognize that God permitted it, but it was not the ideal. The ideal that was codified in Old Testament law was clearly heterosexual, monogamous marriage.
Right.
And it shows, again, two adults who are engaging in this through mutual consent. And so that's important. It's an important place to start. It talks about male and female because that's in question today. It talks about a heterosexual union because that's in question today. It talks about monogamy because that's in question in some circles. We need to go back to the parameters, and then we need to look at what's going on and figure out, okay, how do we take what's going on out there and conform it to a biblical worldview?
Right.
So we need to understand what the Bible says, and then we need to get out there and try and make a difference. And what we find today is that so many people are biblically illiterate. They don't know what the Bible is saying about something, much less knowing what to do when they get out there and they confront people in conversation.
Look, and guys, you should be able to have a conversation about any topic. How you have the conversation matters. But you should be able to express a biblical truth if that's what you believe. If you don't believe it, then that's fine. But my humble opinion is be able to give an answer why. Be able to argue a logically consistent reason why. Have empirical data why. And then have experiential relevance, meaning that how does it play out in my lives? Those are the three ways to test truth, right? I mean, logical consistency, empirical meaning evidence, adequacy, and then experiential relevance. I mean, does it make sense or is it just some theory that you can't apply? And those are things that apply to everybody, not just to Christians, to Islamic people, Hindu, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, Taoist, Shintoist, whatever, Astro, whatever the hell, and Universalist, whatever. There's all kinds of worldviews and religions out there. And so you should, as a Christian, I think we get the raw deal. We either have the piñata mentality where people knock the shit out of us and we just sit there and take it and fucking just right here, or we try to overcorrect, and maybe there's some people out there that act. I mean, I always say there's 11 commandments, and the 11th commandment is don't be an asshole. I mean, being courageous and being true and bold doesn't mean you have to be a jerk about it. I mean, and so there's always this fine line of how do I be courageous but not overdo it, but then how do I not be a peacekeeper, meaning I'm going to do everything to keep the peace versus be a peacemaker, that I'm going to do my best to make the peace without compromising
It's difficult to be courageous when you're ignorant. That's why we tell people, what are you going to do?
That's not a shot, that's just reality, right?
Courage, ignorant courage is just being loud. We don't want people to just be loud.
That's right.
I mean, make sure you have something of value to say. And what makes the Bible so attractive, among many reasons, is that it appeals to objective reality. Sex is an objective thing. Mm-hmm. Not only is it verifiable through natural law, through biological law, but it's also verifiable, it's also condoned and supported through God's special revelation in Scripture. Mm-hmm. There's alignment, perfect alignment between natural law and what the Bible proposes.
And in today's society, I think there's a problem because there's a confusion between affirmation and love. And I think that it's been exploited. I mean, the definition of love today is you affirm me. Affirmation is something completely different than love. I mean, love is saying no.
Or even affirm what I do.
Well, I mean, actions, whatever. I'm just saying no is a full sentence and no is an act of love. If your 12-year-old comes up to you and says, hey, Pop, Mom, can I go date that 25-year-old? They seem really nice. They want to take me out for ice cream. And can I borrow the car to go meet him? Oh, and they want to meet at a La Quinta for some reason. What are you going to say? Well, you're going to say, yes, honey, you don't want to hurt her feelings? Yeah. Or do you want to say, no, you're not going? Well, why? I don't give a shit why. No. The answer is no. It's a full sentence. You're not going. I'll explain it to you later after you calm down. I mean, so no is an act of love. Just because you disagree with somebody, our society, because George and I, in another podcast, we talked about this victim culture, and we'll dissect it in here because it plays into this, and it plays into a lot of things, that if you disagree, it's because you hate. That's just not the case. I mean, you might disagree with your spouse, you might disagree with a friend, you might disagree with a business partner, disagree with a sibling, disagree with your children. There's no way you say you hate those people just because you disagree with them. You have a different opinion. And I kind of bring in this First Amendment because I truly believe in the Constitution and the biblical principles that kind of set up our country. Not kind of, they did. And I believe in being able to express your thought. God gave us this consciousness. He gave us free agency. He gave us this thing called this Imago Dei. His image is through us, and we can relate to each other. We reason with each other, which is very different than animals. I mean, lions aren't reasoning together. Hey, Ralph, you think we should eat that zebra? I don't know. That might be someone's mom. Who gives a shit? I'm hungry. I mean, they don't do that crap. I mean, lions just instinctively react. They don't respond. They react. Animalistic reaction versus response. We're different than that, or we're supposed to be. We're supposed to assess and respond like first responders, not first reactors. And that means we have a conscience. That means we can reason. We spar in our mind. We call that critical thinking. And we share ideas. And even if it's a shitty idea, you're not going to know if it's a crappy idea if you don't compare it to a good idea. But the person with the crappy idea has to have the freedom to share it, and then we compare, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was thinking about, as you were describing this notion of freedom, the whole problem, or a significant problem with the sexual revolution of the 1960s, is it was a redefinition of the concept of freedom, that I can do whatever the hell I want to do. And that's actually antithetical to the notion of liberty. Liberty and truth have to go hand in hand. It's not just about what I can do, but what about what I should do or shouldn't do. Because if I misuse my freedoms against my neighbor, then the outcome is not going to be pretty, because that neighbor then is going to misuse his freedoms against me. Right. And so then what we have is chaos and anarchy. So we need to pursue truth in our pursuit of liberty. And truth is always going to be about what I should do as much about what I can do. Right? Because I have to consider...
Oughtness, right? Ravi Zacharias used to call it... He used to say oughtness. What ought we do, right? What standard sets that?
That's right. And so the scripture's the same way. It's not just about what we can do, but what is beneficial to me, to myself, and to my neighbor. And not everything I can do is beneficial.
Right. And the problem we run into, and I think what's happened as we get into this topic, and all these topics, when we're talking about sexuality and things like that, we've weaponized our emotions. Think about that. We've weaponized our emotions. Arguably, a lot of people believe this. It wasn't my idea. I got this from somebody else. But the three most powerful words, if I'm getting this right, in the English language today is, I am offended. Well, that'll shut down that'll shut your ass down, your opinion, your this, the NBA, the NFL, the this, the that. I mean, it'll shut down cities, city council.
Right.
I am offended
That's
are the
right.
three most powerful words in English language.
Sure.
Isn't that scary? Sure. I am offended. That means then what do we do? So we've weaponized emotions, and your
right.
emotions could be wrong.
Sure.
I mean, that's why I say if you're living your life off of your emotions, be really careful. Because what if you don't feel like being married because you're not happy with your spouse? You're gonna run off and cheat? You're gonna just leave the house? I don't feel like being an unselfish daddy or mommy. Well then shit, but screw my kids and forget them. I don't feel like getting up and making them food. You're not gonna feed this. I mean, think about that. If we live our life off our emotions, our emotions change multiple times throughout the day versus our worldview, what we think. What is our mind? It's a consciousness in our mind, and what do we truly believe? So belief system. You want to change your behavior? Change what you believe, and that'll dictate your behavior, because your behavior is a dashboard just to what you believe. It's just a testing ground. Just get your symptoms. So if you have bad behavior, then you have bad symptoms, and you're spiritually, emotionally sick maybe. And if you have good behavior, then you're spiritually healthy, emotionally healthy. I think that's a good way to look at it.
I think we've the problem with living life based on emotions is that it's just one wild swing to another, right? I mean, our emotions constantly change. I can go from being really happy to being really pissed off pretty quickly. Hang out around me and you'll see it. That's not a really great way to live life. At some point, I need to recognize that I'm going to have to be accountable to something greater and someone higher. And so God says, don't live your life based on your emotions. Base your life on what I consider to be valuable, on what I consider important. Reorient your thinking based on my priorities and not yours. And so, man, that is a total worldview change. And this is the great proposition from the Bible, right? Are we going to accept it or are we going to reject it? We've built America on that proposition, that at some point we are going to have to give an account for how we think and the things that we do. The country's based on that, and we're deviating from that. We are essentially replacing God with ourselves.
Yeah, there's a God, it's just us now.
That's right.
Yeah.
We're it. And so this is why offense is really the end of that. So if someone's offended, oh my goodness, the whole world collapses. We've essentially elevated victimization status.
Yes,
and everybody's competing with everybody to see who can get the highest possible recognizable victim status. That is just a
And it's a tribal mentality. There's groupthink. You're setting things up from the oppressor to the oppressed. We'll dissect this in another episode, guys, because it's its own topic. It obviously bleeds into this and all these topics that we're talking about, because we victimize this based off our emotions and our feelings.
Yes, it relates directly to pedophilia in the sense that you started by quoting Tom Wilson. And Tom Wilson said that children can feel pleasure. It's kind of irrelevant. It's really not the point. Whether children can do it is irrelevant.
Well, the
question is whether they should be exposed to those experiences, because we know from all kinds of social research that children, because remember, a pedophile is someone who has affections, who has an attraction, still classified as a mental disorder, to prepubescent children. And prepubescent children are, according to all the social research, not in a position where they can make adequate value judgments. So that if you're subjecting them to those experiences, that's akin to abuse. So it's not about can, it's about should. That's the issue.
The oughtness session again.
Yes,
I mean, look, you give kids an option, they're going to want to eat ice cream and cake and Halloween candy all day long. I mean, and they're going to love it. And they're going to. Is it good for them? Are you going to say yes to them if they're drinking soda water all day long? I mean, of course not.
Sure.
I mean, are they going to smoke out and do all kinds of bullshit or drive? They want to drive. I mean, and so my issue, I guess, as we move into this, is we should be able to have a conversation, guys. We should critically think, and we should logically work through this issue and all issues from a biblical worldview. If you consider yourself a Christian, I mean, then you would look at it from a biblical worldview. And if you don't, and the problem that I have, the thing that's irritating, is it's usually, believe it or not, it's usually the non-Christian, the atheist that starts with the name calling. Look, as a litigator, as a trial lawyer, if I walked into court and said, that son of a bitch is guilty or not guilty, they're full of shit, and all that stuff, just making these conclusionary statements and name calling, I mean, a jury should laugh me out of court. Like, that's all you got? I mean, you're just a name calling, guy walking in here just calling people names and making these conclusions. Why? Because Nico said so? I mean, give me the evidence that backs up your claim. Whether I was a prosecutor or right now as a defense attorney, I still have to have evidence to back up these claims. Well, I mean, we should still do that. So when you get into a conversation or whatever, a discussion on just name calling without
That's right.
evidence, I think you need to reassess whether you want to be in that conversation, because it's really helpful. And then you have to ask the person that's using that technique, that's all you got? I mean, really, that's it? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't have any
We
evidence.
very
to
closely
persuade me.
supervise the access to social media among all our children. And we're slowly just allowing them to get involved in conversations on social media, Instagram, and other places.
that.
And one of the rules that we have is that if somebody wants to assault and to attack your evidence, tell them to have at it. If they have a problem with your argument, that's okay. If they start demeaning you, if they start calling you names, I don't care who they are, you unfollow them. Dispatch them. Do not allow them to demean you. You see, the issue is by assigning a label to you, they automatically dehumanize you.
Right.
You are demeaned. So why in the world should they have to come up with an argument? Because you're not even human.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And if you're going to do that,
Well, that's what, and it happens on both sides, in the sense that last week you should have heard the thing some of the people saying when we brought up the pedophilia issue, and I just said, I get the emotion, get it out of your system, but let's have a reasonable, logically consistent, approach, principled approach of why it's
Sure.
not beneficial for our society and kids, and we did that, and we started from that nucleus of the Bible.
the fact that it's even a controversy, I think, is a real
Well,
sad
I mean, it says,
testimony
yeah.
of where we are and our lack of the ability to think critically.
But we've talked about, and we did last week, talked about the Greek times and how it was in the old days, and Mary being younger than Joseph. So we've heard all the arguments, we analyzed all of them. Culture at the time matters a little bit too. When you're talking about maturity levels, lifespan was made a difference. Just go to third world country and you see 5, 6, 7-year-olds running a household, helping raise children, mature, the look on their faces differently. They don't have the distractions, they're matured. Even in our country, age of innocence was over by 13. 13 years old, James Madison was an ambassador for the United States at 13. There was kids at 12 years old fighting behind enemy lines in the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. 12-year-olds working for the Pony Express by themselves, crossing the country on a horse to deliver letters by themselves, to deal with all the different dangers and the stars, and directing themselves and providing food for themselves. So it was definitely a different time. So we went through all that stuff. So all those little
There's a
soundbite
built-in
arguments.
sense of urgency,
Yeah.
right? I mean, your lifespan's 35 to 40 years
Right.
of age.
It's completely
I mean, you got to
different.
hurry up and live life and get started. Okay, that's the way things were. That's reality. But that's not the way things are now. And so we shouldn't just look at that and say, well, it was okay then. Well, there was a lot of things that were okay
Right.
then and are okay now. Lots of diseases were okay then too, because that's
Right.
the way things were. They're not okay today. You want to go back to those times? So we really got to sit back and be able to make those arguments as believers. My confidence is low, though.
Well,
My confidence is low, unfortunately.
look, so we start from that biblical prescription. So sex, the appropriateness of sexual interaction that should be enjoyed is between one man and one woman in the confines of a marriage and a commitment to each other, not randomly. And look, I was no angel. I'm not going to disrespect my wife, but I was no angel before I was married. So I'm not trying to be some goody two-shoes piece of, lying, fake-ass person. I get it, okay? And, I'm not going to speak for George. But, I mean, I get that.
Well, George isn't going to speak for
Okay,
George.
just don't say anything. Don't incriminate yourself. And so all I'm just saying is, but now that I know, I've known the truth and I've been committed to the Lord for years now. I mean, coming up close to 16 years now. It matters to me, and so I'm not going to not advocate truth just because I didn't follow it at some season in my life. I mean, that's part of my testimony, this maturing, this growth, this glorying in God's splendor by trying to be more and more into Christ's image, because he was a real historical person that was a badass. I mean, I'm fascinated by the historical Jesus, which led me to the fact that this guy's a messianic Jesus. I mean, he's exactly who he says he was, but that was on another show. So that prescription is marital situation, God as the center, understanding the duties to each other, and we on another podcast, and we'll talk about marriage and duties within a marriage. We dissected Ephesians 5, 1 Peter 3, Genesis, Matthew 19, all that stuff we will do, and we'll do again, guys. I mean, I know people want to talk about that because everybody gets caught up on certain words, especially in Ephesians 5, and not understanding what the word submit means, and everybody goes bananas over that, but there's really a practical approach to that. But that's the prescription, right,
Can
George?
you please emphasize that? Because that's the part about God as the center. This is
Okay.
unique to
You
Christianity, and it's unique to the Old Testament. You're not going to find that anywhere in the ancient Near East, where God presides as a witness over a relationship between a man and a woman in a marriage covenant, and they're both accountable to him. Deities didn't enter into covenants with people in the ancient Near Eastern world. You're not going to find any elements of that in Babylonia or in Assyria. You're not going to find that anywhere, certainly not among the Canaanites. This is unique. to the biblical model. So when we say God, or marriage is God's idea and he invented it, we're being very specific in what we're talking about here. The way that contract is structured, that covenant is structured between a man and a woman, we know that it's monogamous, and no, I'm sorry, the vast majority of relationships, any kind of sort of matrimonial relationships in the ancient Near East were virtually all polygamous. And many of them were codified. Polygamy is essentially codified in the Code of Hammurabi from about 1700 BC. So there are clear distinctives between the way marriage is defined in the Old Testament and the way marriage was defined in the ancient Eastern world.
And
That's
Jesus
important.
emphasized
Jesus
that.
did affirm that.
He
Matthew
affirms it.
19 verses 1 through 6, I believe, and he did again in Matthew chapter 10, or Mark chapter 10, excuse me. Jesus emphasized that God, the Father, is presiding over this.
That's a different concept. Think about God presiding over
That's right.
it. So what we tell
He's the
people
linchpin.
is it's not that one can treat the other one the way they're supposed
That's
to,
right.
because your feelings and your emotions are going to fail you.
That's a
Your
big
flesh
deal,
is going to
man.
fail you. But your commitment and the presiding of God over you and your duty that you made a commitment to God is going to bring a different perspective. If you truly are, look, if you don't believe it, then shit, it's not gonna motivate you anything. I mean, this applies. Do you really believe it? I mean, I am committed to my wife, and I elevate her and I honor her, not only because she deserves it, because she truly is a Proverbs 31:10 woman, and I married up. She's made me a better person just by the way she lives life and teaches me lessons. But because I have an obligation and a duty to the Lord, and I believe, as sure as I'm looking into this camera, that I'm going to stand before a first century Jew named. I mean, I believe it as sure as I touched George right there. I believe that. So how is that belief not going to influence me leading up to that moment? Because nobody can tell me when it is. I mean, I pray it's not for another 40, 45 years. But whenever it is, I believe I'm going to stand before Christ and I'm going to have to give an account for my life.
That's an excellent point. I don't know anybody, and I mean, I've been saved for decades. I don't know, and we've done some marriage counseling. We've talked a lot about on this topic, and have talked to hundreds of believers. I can't think of one example where a woman and a man in a marital relationship actually followed the biblical prescription and ended up in absolute chaos. I mean, actually followed it. I'm not saying there aren't difficult times.
Right.
There are some agonizing times.
You have a great testimony.
But they were able to navigate those rough waters in Christ. What a difference it makes. That's the issue here. It's not that you're not going to go through tough times. I mean, you could go through some very agonizing times. But there's something about both people being tethered to Christ and choosing to love one another out of reverence for Christ. Not for each other necessarily, but for Christ. Because you might dislike each other a lot at certain moments.
Yeah.
But when you have that kind of mutual connection to Christ, there's hope.
I heard a pastor that specializes in marital counseling too, him and his wife, that early on in their marriage, he goes, forget about not being in love with each other. We weren't even in like with each other, right?
Exactly.
I mean, they went through, and you have a wonderful testimony that you and Steph share for your first 7 years of marriage and why you guys are so passionate about counseling and ministering in the marriage.
We're going in our 28th year
28
this year.
years, wow.
Yeah, that's
What a-
right.
what a
by
blessing.
by God's infinite
So
grace.
that's the prescription. So anything outside of that prescription, adultery, fornication, homosexual, same-sex relationships, anything outside of the marital covenant with God presiding over, and then of one man and one woman, whether it's pedophilia, whether it's polygamy, whatever it is, and then you talk about gender and transgender issues because it's one man and one woman, and then this is the discussion that we had on another podcast that George and I were on.
Right.
We were analyzing, defining. When I grew up, when you filled out an application, you were told sex. Now, we used to joke around and said as often as you can, but we meant gender, right? I mean, it was gender, male, and then you had sex, and then male, female.
Yeah, you and everybody
It was just that's just what it was. It wasn't even a question. And so you knew that sex was synonymous with gender when it was used as that statement. Now, having sex is a verb, right? Am I saying that right? Is an action. That's something different in a context. But sex and gender were synonymous. That was it. It was just, they were interchangeable, like lawyer and attorney, or physician and doctor. I mean, it was two words that meant the same thing. And over time, that changed.
Yeah, we now have a deviation
Now
from
we have
that,
the sexual
where you
orientation.
have there's sex and gender. So now sex remains the biological, unchangeable, immutable reality. It's a genetic and anatomical proposition. Okay, and then there's gender. Gender is essentially a social and cultural manifestation. In other words, it's how you feel or how you experience your sexual identity, or how it's shaped by the culture. It's a very subjective thing. And so what's happened is that second definition, Nico, is now altering the first definition. So we are redefining sex both in and out of the courts today. That's pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
Because we're chasing a moving target on something so critical.
Well, I mean, it's true. Again,
society.
it baffles me how the criticism, and it's false criticism, by the way, of Christians as being non-science, and the only reason why they talk about that is because they believe they're criticizing our brothers and sisters that believe in a young earth. I mean,
Most of the time,
and
that's the
we
issue.
say this with respect, and people have asked us to handle this topic, and we will. We'll handle Genesis. George and I are not young earthers, meaning that we do not believe in a 6,000 to 10,000 year old earth. And if you want to unfollow us and freak out over it, go ahead. That's fine. But we handle. Hugh Ross does wonderful work on this. Dr. Stephen Meyer does work on this wonderful. George is just. I mean, when we teach it, George baffles me every time we teaches it because it's something new and deeper that we go into. And we go into everything from the Cambrian explosion to the definition of word and yom to 6 days versus the 4 definitions of day and yom, and the Hebrew and hermeneutics and translations and linguistics and what that means. And then George brings in the scientific aspect of it, true science,
Big Bang
and merges
cosmology,
Big Bang.
fine-tuning
Big
the
Bang
universe.
should have given you a big boner as a Christian, because guess what? That sounds like Genesis 1 in the
We
God.
probably just lost about 100 viewers.
Oh,
Isn't
get
that right,
over it,
Solomon?
guys.
Here we go.
Erection, sorry. But what I'm saying, spiritual one. But what I'm saying is Genesis 1, in the beginning God created ex nihilo, from nothing. Boom, out of nothing. Something, a whole bunch of something from nothing. I really don't want to go down this bunny trail. But what I'm saying is, I want to make my point that science and our faith, I mean, it's perfect, because science is a mechanism to test the truth. That's all it is.
That's right.
When people try to misuse scientific, I have a scientific worldview. That's not a worldview. Science is a mode of testing truth.
That's right.
This is a scientist. He's a chemist by trade. And so science is not a worldview. It's testing truth. The rational pursuit of truth, George taught me this years ago. And I love that definition, because rational pursuit, scavenging, like Christians are supposed to do, of truth, objective truth, not your opinion. A scientist doesn't care about your opinion. The study shows what the study shows, right? The evidence, it is what it is, and it's not what it's not. So it's funny how people that falsely criticize many Christians, some of them I guess it's a proper criticism, but not people that deny science, of not being scientific, deny science when you think about the 5,600 plus biological differences between a male and a female.
Thousands.
Well, 5,600 and more. Maybe it's more. Sometimes some people say 6,400. But all I'm saying is there's biological differences between male and female. And I'm not just talking about penises and vaginas. I'm talking about, inside, internally, hormones. I mean, this muscle tissue and fiber, and God designed us beautifully.
That's right.
Fearfully and wonderfully made, and women should be honored and revered of the beautiful gift that they give us in children and how they function in our society and in marital relationship. And I won't get into the marriage thing, and I'm sorry to cut you off, George.
That's okay, go ahead.
But I always tell people that in a biblical marriage, the man leads the family, but the wife runs the home. And I asked Maya that the other day, and so our 11-year-old. I don't know what we were talking about. We were talking about something in the Bible. She asked a question, and I said, "My angel, who leads our family?" She goes, "You do, Papi." And I said, "Oh, I wonder if she's going to get 2 for 2." I said, "Who runs the home?" She goes, "Mommy." And I said, "Bingo!" And I never told her that. I just love that she picked up on it, because God willing, and I'm happy. It just made my chest explode. We model that. And I always honor my wife in front of the children. I do, because I want them to know that mommy should be honored. And when you become a mommy and when you become a wife, you should be honored too. And don't you settle for any man that will not honor you. Not spoil you. We'll spoil you with love, but honor you and love you the way Christ loved the church.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have to get a master's degree in gender studies to be stupid enough to be offended by what you just said. But that's exactly what's going on today.
What I say that was wrong?
Well, the idea that you actually have male-designated roles, because after all, and you lead the home. Well, those are fruits of a patriarchal society.
Well, it's a trust
Okay, this isn't rocket science. We have biological differences that are amenable to certain social and cultural roles. This is the way it's been since time immemorial. Now, the fact that some of those things have been abused, we'll set that aside here.
Yes.
Okay? That doesn't mean the whole thing's a bad idea. In fact, it's a damn good idea. You've got us, human beings, being designed as male or female. Your DNA doesn't lie about your sex. You're chromosomally male or chromosomally
regardless
female.
of what happens.
Okay?
Yeah.
I don't care how much hormonal therapy you go through, you cannot alter the DNA molecule that way. All right? And so All right.
That's your computer code,
Yeah,
so
we
to
start
speak,
there
right?
biologically, and social and cultural differences follow. So, yeah, our maleness or our men and women status biologically kind of line up with male and husband and father roles and female and wife and mother roles. So what? What's so controversial about that?
What's
Now,
not?
the fact that those relationships turn abusive or deviate from the ideal, I get it. But so what? What's wrong with that?
Well, you call out the abusive. Look, you never judge a worldview or an issue by its abuse. You just don't. When I constructively criticize or debate Christianity versus Islam, Christianity versus Hinduism, Christianity versus atheism, whatever it is, I'm not gonna look at someone that's abusing the worldview or the ideology. I'm gonna say, let's look at the ideology, and if you were following it to a T, what would be your results? What are the principles behind it? So to criticize a marriage because a husband abused, well, that's not a biblical prescription,
Yeah,
first
okay,
of all.
right.
I mean, you're called to, God says in 1 Peter 3 that if you don't treat your wife the way Christ served the church and loved the bride of Christ, which is the whole body of Christ, we're called the bride of Christ, and that means serving, sacrificing, and ultimately dying for, then I'm not even going to listen to your ass. I'm not going to listen to your prayers. I mean, that's pretty serious. If someone believes in God and is committed to God, he's saying, no, don't even bother with me. If you don't treat her the way I treated you guys, your body, then don't even bother. Save your breath, Jack. I mean, that's pretty strong language, and that's a pretty strong, hey, there is a duty, and I'm going to follow God's prescription, because God's duty and prescription to me is going to trump my feelings and my emotions for that.
Yeah, just think about that. What is the solution for an abusive relationship? Well, guess what? Stop the abuse. So I'm simplifying this to make a larger point where I'm going here, but you adjust your behavior and you line up your behavior with what God says,
Right.
back to the ideal. What has society done? We foment our differences. We create huge divisions through radical feminism between men and women. And now we're at a place where we're actually saying there's no difference between men and women, that men and women are the same. We've bastardized the notion of equality. And so in the name of standing up for women, as we mentioned this morning in another show,
Yeah.
we've erased what makes women precious and special to begin with. So
Absolutely.
women have literally disappeared.
That's right. Look, I'm a biblical feminist, and we'll
crazy.
do a show on that later and explain exactly what that means. But we talked about that. So when you have this transgender gender fluidity movement,
Sure.
and it's based off feelings, not based off science or biology. It's truly based off your emotion and your feelings and your time, because it's fluid at times, and it's really changed even in my 47 years of being on this earth. I mean, so you really minimize the role of a woman. It's like, you're insignificant. Of
course you do.
I can be a woman, and my issue has always been this. My issue has been the suspension from reality. Even before this pedophilia stuff really started pushing, I remember thinking to myself, in career when I was a special prosecutor before I became the DA and an attorney pro tem for different counties, meaning that I would substitute in when there was a conflict from the DA. I remember thinking to myself, man, if we don't have a standard and if we go off our feelings, what do I do when a 45-year-old man says, hey, Mr. DA, I know you're upset with me. I get that you're pissed off at me and you want to send me to prison, but I mean, I had sex with that 14-year-old or that 13-year-old, but in my mind, I'm 15. I mean, I identify with the 15-year-old, and was I supposed to be like, oh shit, what's wrong with me? Sorry for the inconvenience and give you a dismissal? I mean, why am I not collecting Social Security, and why am I not 65? Well, the answer is not really hard. It's because I'm not 65. I mean, why am I not a 6'5" Chinese woman?
Not a multiple choice
Because I'm not a
question.
6'5" Chinese woman. If my kids come to me and they want to go on a roller coaster, but they're under the height, then I say, but Papi, I identify that in my mind I'm over the height. Oh, you know what? You're right. And they go up 30 feet high and they fly out and crack their head or kill themselves, God forbid. I mean, do I say, oh, but at least they felt good about it? No. I mean, so affirmation and love are I think, are bastardized, as using George's terminology, but are confused. Affirmation and love are different things. So we affirm behavior or not affirm behavior. It doesn't mean that we don't love the person. I mean, I love my kids. I don't affirm their behavior all the time. No, I mean, that's
Yeah.
just condoning and tolerance are two different things. We do need to be more tolerant as Christians, by the way. But that doesn't mean that we have to condone behavior. Jesus was tolerant to the woman at the well, even though she had slept with a bunch of guys. The guy she was living with, Jesus told her exactly what he had done. What kind of conversation was that? I mean, he's probably getting detailed with her, and she's so freaked out about his details of knowing her little sexual escapade. She goes to the town and brags, "This guy, he isn't. He knew everything. Hey, Ralph, remember when you and I? He knew about that too." I mean, I'm being facetious, but it's true. He was real bold with her, so he tolerated that situation, even though he didn't condone her behavior. What did he tell her? Because if you knew what water you were drinking, you wouldn't thirst anymore. You wouldn't try to fill it up with some other type of behavior or any type of Band-Aid. And he said, now go and sin no more. So he tolerated her. He met her where she was at. He pulled her out of where she was at, told her the truth. The truth sets you free. And then he says, now go and sin no more. So, I mean, it's
Exactly
real
right.
commonsensical to me.
really
But that
is.
gets us back to this biblical prescription of sex, all sex in that confines. And then the players in there. The identification of body parts, because sexually they fit very nicely together. And so what does that mean? I mean, that means there's a procreation aspect to it, right?
You and I have made it a big issue recently because the United States Supreme Court just recently, right, through Bostock and Clayton versus Clayton County of Georgia, Justice Gorsuch, in the majority opinion, decided that he was going to say that sexual orientation and sex are the same thing.
Yeah.
He went back to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and said that sex as a protected class when it comes to employment law also includes a notion that didn't even exist back then, which is the notion of sexual orientation, which you and I have talked a lot about, is completely ambiguous.
Just we're not going to dissect this too much, but it's important. There was a Supreme Court case. There was Title VII. There was a 1964 Act. It was a discriminatory act, anti-discrimination act, that protected race or ethnicity. It was really to protect black folks. And then also women, sex. But it was clear, it wasn't even a question. I mean, there's no way, you have a 0% chance. I'm not being arrogant, I'm just being truthful. You have a 0% chance of arguing that it meant anything but male and female. That females didn't have certain rights, they were treated unfairly.
protect them from
It was
discriminatory
protecting them
behavior,
from discriminatory behavior, so it's going to protect ethnicity and race, meaning black folks, or I guess Hispanics and any other minority, but then also women, females.
That's
So
right.
sex, that definition. And so what George is saying is this one Supreme Court justice that normally votes a certain way and has had a position,
Calls himself a textualist.
he went back there and read into the 1964 Act, and then there was this more confusion. The bottom line is this: we are really confused today. We're confused about, I mean, we're having conversation with sexual orientation, gender, fluidity. What the hell does this mean?
We're not confused.
Well, I know that, but
I'm not confused.
transgender
You're not
versus this,
confused.
and what does this mean and that mean? Look, I was honored because I have a friend. Her name is Amber. She classifies herself as a transvestite. There wasn't even transgender back then. She cut my hair for years, and I'm crazy about it. I think she's just the neatest person, and she's actually going through the change, or at least back then she was, and I just think the world of her. And I mean, Davi and I saw her a couple years ago, and we just never got up with her for dinner. But I'm going to now. I'm going to try to reach out to her. But that's here nor there. She cut my hair for years, and I considered her a close friend for a season in my life. But she was just bold in talking about exactly the way she felt and where she was at, and she was considered a transvestite, but she was actually going through the transitionary
Gender
period.
transition.
Yes, there wasn't even a concept of someone that wants to be a male or present like us and then identify with a female. What it does is it demeans God's prescription of the design. Men and women were beautifully made. They're equal in value, but we're not the same. So this argument for sameness is not biblical, and it's very damaging to our society, and
very
it's damaging to our biblical perspective as well. My kids, I love my kids. Their value are equal. They have the same value to me, but they're not the same in individuality. I mean, of course, he's got his challenges, but he's beautiful in his own special, unique way that the Lord has blessed us with him. But Zaither and Leah and Maya, I mean,
And you love them equally, but differently.
equally, I
based on their needs.
would give my life or take someone's life in a blink of an eye for any one of my children equally, meaning they're equal in value but not the same in who they are, and I don't want them to be the same. What does our pastor say? That if two people are identical, then one of them's unnecessary. God relishes and enjoys the uniqueness of his creation.
He really does.
He does.
That's exactly
and so, I mean, this really gets dissected, and this really is really for our longer conversation.
We bring this
We
up
had to
because
give this context
if you're a
leading into
believer, if you're a believer, this has come knocking on your front door.
Yeah.
Whether you're an employee or whether you're an employer, because this is coming. You're now going to be in a situation where you can no longer discriminate on the basis of behavior.
We can't discriminate for anything.
You used to be able to discriminate on the basis of behavior. You used to be able to say, I don't know, if I work at a church and I'm hiring on behalf of a church, I'm going to make decisions to hire on the basis of the moral convictions of what I believe as a Christian. I'm allowed to do that. I can't discriminate against you if you're a woman or if you're a man just because you're a man and a woman, but I should be able to discriminate against you if I find
I know what you mean. Discriminate has a bad connotation, but you're saying make choices.
Yes.
If an Islamic person at a mosque or an Islamic school says no, we're not gonna hire someone that has this lifestyle, then that should be based off their faith and their religious
the word
freedom to be able to do
discriminate,
that.
I'm using it
That's-
generically.
I know you are, but I
Using-
mean, I got to think about the audience. That's all.
Churches are going to have a tough time
religious institutions.
making decisions based on their moral and their biblical convictions because we've erased the difference between sexual orientation and sex. The problem is now it's no longer just about biological sex. It's now about behavior. If I can't say as a Christian that I am not okay with this behavior anymore and that I need to accept it in my organization, we've got problems.
Yeah,
we
First
really do.
Amendment issues, yeah.
And so now for the first time, we're going to see churches facing those issues because I think in large part we've been asleep at the wheel on this issue. We haven't been educating our folks. Our kids are getting taught this drivel in high school and colleges and universities.
We talked
so we've
about that.
adopted this kind of stuff. And so I think it's a caution to be aware of what's going on because these things are really
Well, I mean, look, guys. Cover your ears if you don't want to hear this. But I mean, the kids are being taught, anal sex is normal. I mean, same sex is the difference is the same as heterosexual sex relationships. Abstinence is not taught anymore. Look, that has nothing to do with anything. Just give options to people. I don't want anybody teaching my kids about sex. Now, you can talk about biology. I understand that. I mean, sexual reproduction, we learned that even in a Catholic school. The penis goes in the vagina, and there's sperm and an egg, and there's a kid. I mean, that's just the way it goes. That's science. That's biology.
straightforward.
Well, it is straightforward. No pun intended. It is. But what I'm saying is I'm fine with that. But don't put your moral claws on my kid. So we can't do it, but yet they can. I mean, this hypocrisy. Sorry, we got to start wrapping up, guys. Look. We wanted to give context today. I mean, I hope this. What we really wanted to accomplish today, and I hope we did, and if we didn't, then we'll have to apologize to you, I guess, is an exercise in critical thinking. I mean, we're not giving you any conclusionary statements. We're giving you the why behind positions in a biblical worldview. I'm even taking it out of, never once, I don't think, that I said I think this, in me, Nico standards. I don't have a standard. My standard is Christ's standard. My standard is that book, those 66 books, books in the Bible, with those 40 authors, and I believe it. I do. I believe the evidence is very strong, and it's transformed my life completely. And my wife can tell you that. People that have known me for years can tell you that. It's given me a different purpose. It's given me a different drive and what to do. It's made me see the Imago Dei and the value in everybody. When I wanted to, attack everybody, beat everybody up, and I was angry as shit when I was younger after my brother was murdered. And it brought that Christ-like love and perspective and those lenses that it's biblical and that spiritual LASIK surgery into my heart, and I started looking at the world differently. And so our goal is just to present the evidence for the biblical worldview, for a Christian worldview to people, to present the objective, logical, consistent, non-contradictory evidence of this first century Jew named Yeshua, Jesus. And it applies in sex, it applies with this pedophilia issue, with gender issues, with marriage, biblical marriage, and same-sex marriage, and adultery, and fornication. It applies all that. And I think we're going to have to talk about maybe continuing this next week, because what we really did is just laid a groundwork, and we did this critical thinking exercise and gave you the why the biblical perspective and prescription is what it is. But we need to dissect this more because we don't want to leave you hanging.
use the scripture to
wrap it
analyze
up.
reality.
Yeah.
That's really the point here.
Guys, thanks for your patience. We're really going to trying to start earlier and earlier if we can. It was at 8:30, turns in 8:35, 8:40, but we're always running around everywhere and trying to get everybody at the same time. That's not an excuse, it's a reason, but we're going to work on it. So we thank you for commitment. Share this if you want to. Have a kick-ass and a blessed week, and thanks for tuning in. God bless you guys.